Hi, third graders. Welcome back to another day of reading Fantastic Mr. Fox. Today we're going to read Chapter 13 together. Just as a review from yesterday, we know that while Mr. Fox and the small foxes were continuing to dig after they had got into the chicken house, they ran into Badger and his son. Badger informed him that his family and the other digger families were suffering and very hungry. Mr. Fox decided to invite Badger and all the other digger families to their feast. We know that Badger is extremely grateful to Mr. Fox for doing this. Our big question that we're going to focus on today is who is our new character in this story, and how would we describe this character? We know that we have to use evidence from the text to support our answer. When we're describing characters, we want to think about what the character is doing, what they are saying, how they are feeling, and what we see in the illustrations. Here are some vocabulary words that we're going to see in our reading today that you might not know. First is the word gape. Gape means to stare at someone with amazement. If we see the picture, we see that his eyes are open really wide and his mouth is dropped. That's what someone would look like if they were gaping at someone else. Next is loot. Loot is stolen items that are taken from someone else. And the last one is ravenous. If you are ravenously hungry, that means you are extremely hungry. Remember that as we read Chapter 13 today, we are keeping in mind who our new character is and how we would describe them using evidence from the text. Chapter 13, Bunce's Giant Storehouse. "My dear Foxy," cried Badger, "what in the world has happened to your tail?" "Don't talk about it, please," said Mr. Fox. "It's a painful subject." They were digging the new tunnel. They dug in silence. Badger was a great digger, and the tunnel went forwards at a terrific pace now that he was lending a paw. Soon they were crouching underneath yet another wooden floor. Mr. Fox grinned slyly, showing sharp white teeth. "If I am not mistaken, my dear Badger," he said, "we are now underneath the farm which belongs to the nasty little pot-bellied dwarf Bunce. We are, in fact, directly underneath the most interesting part of that farm." "Ducks and geese!" cried the small foxes, licking their lips. "Juicy, tender ducks and big, fat geese." "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "But how in the world can you know where we are?" asked Badger. Mr. Fox grinned again, showing even more white teeth. "Look," he said, "I know my way around these farms blindfolded. For me, it's just as easy below ground as it is above it." He reached high and pushed up one wooden floorboard, then another. He poked his head through the gap. "Yes!" he shouted, jumping up into the room above. "I've done it again! I've hit it smack in the nose! Right in the bullseye! Come and look!" Quickly, Badger and the three small foxes scrambled up after him. They stopped and stared. They stood and gaped. They were so overwhelmed they couldn't speak, for what they now saw was a kind of fox's dream, a badger's dream, a paradise for hungry animals. "This, my dear old Badger," proclaimed Mr. Fox, "is Bunce's mighty storehouse. All his finest stuff is stored in here before he sends it off to market." Against all the four walls of the great room, stacked in cupboards and piled upon shelves, reaching from floor to ceiling, were thousands and thousands of the finest and fattest ducks and geese, plucked and ready for roasting. And up above, dangling from the rafters, there must have been at least 100 smoked hams and 50 sides of bacon. "Just feast your eyes on that!" cried Mr. Fox, dancing up and down. "What do you think of it, eh? Pretty good grub." Suddenly, as though springs had been released in their legs, the three hungry small foxes and the ravenously hungry Badger sprang forward to grab the luscious food. "Stop!" ordered Mr. Fox. "This is my party, so I shall do the choosing." The others fell back, licking their chops. Mr. Fox began prowling around the storehouse, examining the glorious display with an expert eye. A thread of saliva slid down one side of his jaw and hung suspended in midair, then snapped. "We mustn't overdo it," he said. "Mustn't give the game away. Mustn't let them know what we've been up to. We must be neat and tidy and take just a few of the choicest morsels. So, to start with, we shall have 4 plump young ducks." He took them from the shelf. "Oh, how lovely and fat they are! No wonder Bunce gets such a special price for them in the market. All right, Badger, lend me a hand to get them down. You children can help as well. There we go. Goodness me, look how your mouths are watering. And now, I think we had better have a few geese. 3 will be quite enough. We'll have the biggest, oh my, you'll never see finer geese than these in a king's kitchen. Gently does it, that's the way. And what about a couple of nice smoked hams? I adore smoked ham. Don't you, Badger? Fetch me that stepladder, will you please?" So let's pause for a second. We know that Mr. Fox just talked for almost this entire page. Why do you think that he was so forceful in telling Badger and the small foxes to stop when they got into the storeroom? If I'm thinking aloud here, I think he told them to stop because he himself wanted to make sure that they were kind of covering their tracks. He wanted to make sure that they were doing things properly and that they weren't going to get caught. I also think that Mr. Fox himself was probably a little bit overwhelmed seeing all this glorious food, and he wanted to make sure that people weren't getting, the rest of the foxes and Badger were not getting too greedy about it. Let's continue. Mr. Fox climbed up the ladder and handed down 3 magnificent hams. "And do you like bacon, Badger?" "I'm mad about bacon," cried Badger, dancing with excitement. "Let's have a side of bacon, that big one up there." "And carrots, Dad," said the smallest of the 3 small foxes. "We must take some of those carrots." "Don't be a twerp," said Mr. Fox. "You know we never eat things like that." "It's not for us, Dad. It's for the rabbits. They only eat vegetables." "My goodness me, you're right," cried Mr. Fox. "What a thoughtful little fellow you are. Take 10 bunches of carrots." Soon all this lovely loot was lying in a neat heap upon the floor. The small foxes crouched closely, their noses twitching, their eyes shining like stars. "And now," said Mr. Fox, "we shall have to borrow from our friend Bunce 2 of those useful push carts over in the corner." He and Badger fetched the push carts, and the ducks and the geese and hams and the bacon were loaded onto them quickly. Quickly, the push carts were lowered through the hole in the floor. The animals slid down after them. Back in the tunnel, Mr. Fox again pulled the floorboards very carefully into place so that no one could see that they had been moved. "My darlings," he said, pointing to 2 of the 3 small foxes, "take a cart each and run back as fast as you can to your mother. Give her my love and tell her that we are having guests for dinner. The badgers, the moles, the rabbits, and the weasels. Tell her it must be a truly great feast. And tell her the rest of us will be home as soon as we've done just one more little job." "Yes, Dad, right away, Dad," they answered. They grabbed a trolley each and went rushing off down the tunnel. So remember before we started reading, I told you our big question for today was to describe who our new character was using evidence from the text. So I want you to think about who the character that we met in chapter 12 and 13 is and how you would describe them. Pause the video now and try to answer that question to yourself. Once you think you have an answer, you can press play. So we know that our new character that we've met in the past 2 chapters is Badger. How would I describe Badger? I'm thinking about some of the things that they said about him, things that he's said, what I've noticed about him in pictures. So I know that they said he was a digger. A digger is an animal that digs down in the ground. So I could use that word to describe him, that he is a digger. I also know that they use the word ravenously, the words ravenously hungry to describe him. So I know he is extremely hungry because he has not eaten in several days. So I know that he is a digger. I know that he's extremely hungry. And I'm also thinking about how I would describe Badger's relationship with Mr. Fox. And I know that he's really grateful for everything Mr. Fox is doing for him and the rest of his family. So how I would describe Badger: he's a digger, he's extremely hungry, and he's very grateful to Mr. Fox for allowing him to come to their feast. Now this is your job. In the comments, I want you to answer the following question. How does Mr. Fox feel about including other animals in his plan to feast on the food taken from the 3 farmers? So how does Mr. Fox feel about including the different digger families, the weasels, the badgers, the rabbits? How does he feel about including all of them in his feast with his family? Use evidence from the text. You can go back and flip to other pages and tell me, how does he feel about including them in his feast that he's going to be having? All right, we'll see you tomorrow for chapter 14.